My name's Theo. I'm going to be doing a panel on modding and painting Nerf guns. I've been participating in Nerf events for probably about 3 years now. Been painting blasters about that long, and modding them for maybe 2 years because it took a little while before I got into actually modding.
Okay. Well, I've got 2 Nerf Mavericks here to...
nice.
Yes. We'll see if my aim improves throughout the panel and if I can shoot the camera.
You need to upgrade the rifle.
Oh, yeah, I figured. So I'll have those ready to go. I can't paint them with you, but... So go ahead and take it away. I'll push your slides for you.
Yeah, go ahead on to the next slide.
Yeah. All right.
So I did put a little disclaimer in the beginning. We are talking about tearing things apart and modifying them, so there are safety issues. I recommend you always wear some sort of eye protection. I was actually modifying a blaster one time trying to replace the spring. This was a couple years ago. And the spring and the whole internals exploded all over my living room. And to this day, I've never found it. I don't know where it is, but luckily it did not hit me in the face, but it can happen. I will also be talking about soldering, and of course solder is very hot, so don't burn yourself. And finally, be aware that these are plastic toys we're talking about, so if you get into heavy modding, there's the potential for them to break. And if you're 18 or younger, do not mod without adult supervision. Okay, on the next slide. A little bit of terminology that I'll get into for the modding stuff, and then at the end I'll talk about the painting. Okay. The most common way that we refer to the a blaster's shooting ability is FPS, feet per second. It's not the best judge, but it's the most common one. You can also talk about range. Accuracy is a big one, and of course rate of fire. A few benchmarks when I talk about this stuff. When I'm talking about stock, I mean what you get out of the store, sort of your standard, Nerf blaster. And those usually shoot about 70 FPS, 70 feet per second. Beyond that, you start getting into what's known as super stock and humans versus zombies, which is a game I play a lot where the humans have blasters and the zombies are trying to tag them. And if you get tagged, you turn into a zombie. And it always starts out with like 1 zombie and 100 humans, and then 2, and then 4, and then 8, and then eventually all the humans die and become zombies. But those usually have higher limits, like 130, and that's where you get into the modding aspect. So this is my primary for when I'm zombie hunting, and as you can hear, it grabs up a little higher.
America.
And I forgot to load it. Yeah, this is the America blaster. As you can hear and tell that it revs a little higher, closer to that 130 FPS, and shoots a little harder.
Do you use your shield in the background when you use it?
Oh, sometimes. That is actually, I made that as a joke. It's actually a frisbee, like a giant foam frisbee.
Okay.
So there are shield battles that we play in sometimes, and I actually made that one because it's soft enough that I can throw it Captain America style.
Ah, okay.
I've never actually hit anyone with it, but I always get a good laugh when I try. And then beyond that, you get into Ultra Stock and NC and what's known as Nerf Internet Community, and these are sort of levels beyond the beginner, so I'll probably just hold off on those. And if you go into the next slide. So I'll be talking about 2 main types of blasters. Springers use spring, obviously, to work. Oh. Am I there?
Yep.
Okay. My screen locked up. I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, so they use a compression spring that you have to manually operate fire. The other type is the flywheels, which are already demonstrated. They actually have a demo here I can show you. When you rev the trigger, the wires actually run to 2 motors underneath the flywheels, and that revs the flywheels, and that pushes the dart through a lot like a pitching machine at a baseball game.
Do any of them come from the store like that, or is that a modification, the flywheel?
Oh no, this is standard. That orange one that I showed in the beginning, this is a standard one you can buy at a store called a Strife.
Got it.
And this is actually one of the first ones that a lot of people mod once they get into electronics because they're very easy to mod. The wiring is very simple. I can actually show you with the half one. Yeah, this is the same thing, just in blue instead of purple, or blue instead of orange.
Okay.
And so the operation is actually very simple. There's a little switch down here, and that runs up to the battery tray, which is on the other side of this panel here. And then wiring goes underneath here to the motors, and that revs the motors. And then a pusher just pushes the dart into the motors. So the internal operation is very simple. Most of what the issues that people have is that Hasbro puts a ton of locks and safeties in here, and one of the first things you do as a modder is remove all those because they just get in the way. Safety first. We can go on to the next slide. So springers have some pros and cons. Springers can generally reach much higher power. This is a good example. This is actually an aftermarket one that I purchased recently, but it is really just a reskin of this one.
Looks intense.
I just got looking forward to using it. But the center part of this one is really just another version of this with a lot of stuff added on. But with the higher spring, you can actually get a lot more power out of it. And another mod that this has, which I'll talk about later, is that it actually uses half-length darts instead of full-length darts. And because half-length darts are lighter, they fly further. And springers can actually be more accurate too. On the con side, you actually have to physically compress the spring. When you get up to some of these really powerful springs, that can actually become a problem if you're not strong enough or if you get tired. They can be more difficult to upgrade because once you have the equipment to modify a flywheel blaster, the soldering iron and everything, it's fairly straightforward. With springs, you have to worry about compressions and catch springs and all the internals, and so there's a lot more to it. And because the springs can hold a lot of power, they can sometimes break easier. Okay. Flywheels are sort of the reverse. Flywheels have a higher rate of fire because you don't have to compress the spring every time. You just rev and pull the trigger over and over again. Like I said, they can be easier to upgrade. Batteries do all the work for you rather than you having to sit there and work the spring. On the con side, high-end batteries, and when I talk about that, what I'm talking about is Lipos, which are lithium polymer batteries. These are used a lot in drone applications. This is sort of the high end of what people use to mod with. These can store a lot of energy, and so you have to treat these with respect. They're very safe, but if you don't handle them properly and store them properly, they can
explode.
Be dangerous. Yeah, I don't like to say explode.
I've never actually overheat, catch on fire.
Overheat, catch fire, smoke, that kind of thing. That's why I keep mine in a safe, fireproof bag, and I store them properly. But if you treat them with, it's like your car can explode if you don't treat it properly. If you do things the right way, treat them with respect, they work great.
I like that.
And as I demonstrated, the one other con with flywheels is they can be loud. So that's a consideration. Next slide. So upgrading springers. Next slide. There's several levels to upgrade. One of the first upgrades a lot of people do is that most blasters that you get include air restrictors and dart posts, which is this post in the middle here. And that's designed to mostly prevent people from putting other things besides darts in these and shooting them. But it does limit the power that can come out of them. So a mod that a lot of people do right off the bat is they, again, remove all that, and you have a straight shot down the barrel to the compressed air, and that generally gives you a lot more power out of it.
So we've got a question from the lobby. How fast do they shoot out, and does it hurt?
The basic ones, they shoot, like I said, about anywhere from like 50 to 70 FPS. That's usually the upper limit. The modified ones, this one has a double spring in it. And I think that's it. This is actually my indoor one that I use a lot. So it shoots about 90 FPS.
How much is that in regular everyday speak?
Oh, gosh. I think it's like 60 miles an hour.
Okay.
Something like that. It's fairly fast. You'll feel it. It won't really sting when you get into something like this where you've got brass barrels, which I'll talk about in a minute, and air restrictors. This can actually sting, and then if you get into something crazy like the blue one that I showed earlier, at that end, you do get into a situation where you don't want to shoot people at under 10 feet or something like that because it'll hurt. So getting to the high end, they can actually hurt. And usually that gets to the point where you're dealing with new springs, like the K26 spring I'm talking about, and aftermarket kits. The other thing a lot of people will do is use a brass barrel, which is something like this. And what this does is this basically fits the dart perfectly, so that all the air being pushed out of the compressed air from the spring, for example, is used. Whereas on your standard Nerf gun, the barrel is actually a lot larger than the dart. And so, oh no, it's not going to do it. Normally the dart would just fall out. There. But anyway, and then one other level of this, if you want to get into accuracy, this is something I built that I'm inordinately proud of. There's something called a scar barrel, and that's a brass barrel that you can fit over the end of your blaster. And it's designed, let's see if, where'd the mirror, where'd the camera, there we go.
Yep.
No, there, okay. So it's designed to have wires in it, and those wires induce spin in the dart, which, like the rifling on a regular gun, will actually cause the dart to spin and be more accurate. And so this is something you can make relatively easy using 17/32 brass, and you just drill some holes, and you run wire from here to this hole, and then from here, here to this hole, and then from here to the, you wrap them around, so you get this twisting effect. And that actually gives you spin. And it does work. I've tested it. Oh, nice. I like that one. I just got that's an Alpha Trooper. I actually just got my first one a while back. That's a nice painting job.
Wow.
Cool. Next.
Oh, sorry. I was distracted by the Nerf gun.
You can keep going because I already kind of demoed some of the
Yep. Okay.
So getting to flywheels, again, we talked about soldering. For a lot of these, when you start upgrading batteries and motors, the wiring that comes stock inside the blasters is not sufficient for the job, so you need to upgrade to a thicker wire. I don't know if you can see it here, but this wiring in here is actually fully replaced, and none of this internals is stock at this point because the wires will just melt underneath like a Lipo battery. You can also get new flywheels that you can order from companies online, which we'll talk about later. These have a couple features. One of the really cool ones is that they're actually concave. Let's see if I can get that lined up. No, where's my camera? Really should have marked my camera. There we go.
Right there?
Yeah. And so it actually, we call it crush, but it actually crushes the dart and lets it impart more energy as it goes through. And another thing that's become really big, of course, is 3D printing. And so what a lot of people now are doing is they're printing 3D cages with their 3D printers. And this is where the flywheels attach, like so. And then the motors go on the back. And what this lets you do is this lets you adjust that compression to add more or less depending on how much you want to crush the dart as it goes through and how much energy you want to impart.
Right. And for those interested, we have a 3D printing panel later in the convention as well.
Yep.
Although we never heard back from them, so it might turn into a cosplay panel. We'll see.
Oh, no. Okay. My 3D printer is currently offline, and I'm trying to get it up and running again.
That's been my experience with 3D printers, so we'll see.
They spend a lot of time down, unfortunately. Next slide.
There we go.
So there's several upgrade levels. One of the first ones that a lot of people do is swapping out the batteries for what are called IMRs. These are batteries that are used a lot in e-cigarettes and also like high-end tactical flashlights. One thing I want to say here is there's a brand or a style of them called Trust Fires. Do not use those. They are very cheap and they are prone to actually melting and burning out and things like that. So if you see Trust Fire, don't use it. Otherwise, it's safe to use the 14500s. And let's see if I can do this real quick. So what I've done in this blaster, for example, is I've taken out the 4 AA's and I've replaced it with 2 IMRs. But 2 IMRs is actually enough voltage for the system, so you actually have to also get 2 dummy batteries, and these are just pass-throughs. So it's only actually 2 batteries being used. It stands for something.
No worries. I'm just used to I'm used to asking when I hit an acronym I don't understand. Okay.
I don't know. I've totally blanked on it.
Don't worry.
Yeah, it's one of the types of lithium-ion batteries out there. That's what I'll say. I think I talked about rewiring and I talked about Lipos. The thing with Lipos is there's a little bit of an upfront cost because in addition to the actual Lipo battery, you do have to buy a charger. This runs you maybe $30, but nice shot. But the nice thing with this is that once you have one of these, the Lipos are relatively inexpensive, $7 to $9, and they'll last a really long time. So once you're ready to make that jump, it's actually really worth it. So I think I've demoed kind of the most of the levels of that. Like I said, did my primary. So we can move along because I don't want to run out of time. Okay. So getting into painting next.
Yep.
So as with a lot of things, one of the most important things when you're getting ready to do painting is the prep work. And the biggest part of the prep work is the most annoying, and that's sanding the blaster. So I don't know if this will show up on camera, but this is that orange stripe that I was talking about earlier, and I actually fiddled with this for this presentation. So this is what it looks like normally, and then I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but this is the sanded side, and it's really hard to tell on camera. But you'll see that I've kind of the white stripe is kind of worn down, and actually the handle is the best place to see it. So this is with it being partially sanded. This isn't even as sanded as it should be. I should probably have sanded to the point that all this gray is gone and just the orange is exposed. But you can see the difference between initial and sanded. And this is because this side actually has a clear coat on it that's going to stop the paint from actually sticking to it, and you're going to get horrible results. So it's very important that you sand, sand, sand. I usually start with like a 200 grit and then go to a 400. And if I really care, I've gone all the way up to 1200 before, but you can probably get away with like a 440 grit as a finish level.
So somebody in the chat answered your IMR acronym, or our IMR acronym question. Lithium ion manganese rechargeable, or LiMN, lithium manganese. So.
Okay, so the M is, yeah, I think there's like different, like IMR, IAR. There's a couple different ones like that, and IMR is just the one I've always heard about.
Well, it looks like we got a whole team fact-checking us back here.
Oh, okay. I got to be careful then. Okay. Focus. Okay. So once you're done sanding, the next thing you got to do is wash everything. So obviously take out all the electronics, strip it out to its shell, which will look something like this with nothing inside. And then after you've done sanding it, you got to wash it, let it dry, and that'll get all the dust and everything off. And then you can finally get into painting. And painting is actually fairly straightforward. You don't have to use high-end paints or anything like that. I've used everything from like simple, Michael's Craftsmart paint. For larger projects, you usually will use some sort of spray paint. I just generally use Rust-Oleum because it works really well, and they have a pretty good spread of colors. I have started experimenting with vinyl dyes, and these are nice because what they do is they actually soak into the plastic and dye the plastic as opposed to just painting the surface. So you can get a much more durable result with these than you can with spray paint. They're a little bit harder to find. The selection is usually not as good, and they're a bit more expensive. But from my limited use of them, they do seem to be worth it. And then finally, once you've and then there's a couple of levels. I do have an airbrush. I've used that for some detail work. That works really well. Hydro dipping is a level I've never gotten to. That's actually where you take a bowl of like a bucket of water, and you have a pattern that you lay on top of it, and you spray an activator chemical, and then you take your blaster shell and you run it through the water and lift it out, and the pattern that was on that sheet is then transferred like those old school temporary tattoos we used to get as kids onto the blaster. You can get some really cool patterning that way. I don't think it's super expensive, but I've just never gotten into it.
Okay.
Let's move along because I'm blathering a little too long probably here. My screen has a lot. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So masking is another good technique. This is a blaster I've been working on for my goddaughter. Honestly, for way too long. For something like that, you can take some blue tape, which is blue painter's tape, and this is nice because it's not very good tape. Honestly, it doesn't stick very well, but that also means that it won't peel your paint off. And when you're doing a project like this, let me get this set up here. What you'll do is you'll tape along a line like this, and you'd have this running all along this length here, and then you do your spray paint and everything, and then you can peel the tape away, and this gives you a very nice, crisp, clean line that you can work with. You can even get into the level of cutting out patterns on the tape if you want to do a logo or something like that, or your name. I've messed with that before too. But this is a really easy and simple way to get very clean lines on your designs.
In your house too.
Yes, yeah. That's one thing. So a lot of the stuff, unfortunately, because everything's closed down, unless you have paints and stuff lying around, it's going to be harder to do. But a lot of you actually probably have paints lying around. But blue tape, a lot of people have. If you don't have blue tape, you can use masking tape. What I recommend for that is that, because masking tape will be a little too sticky and good peel-off tape, you take the masking tape and you stick it to some fabric, and this will basically get some fuzz on there and ruin the stickiness a little bit, and then you can use it like regular blue tape. So you can do that if all you have is masking tape, and that'll basically reduce the stickiness to where it'll still stick to the blaster, but it won't peel paint off when you go to remove it.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. And so if you want to get some cool After Effects, I had an example of this. Yes. So there's a couple things I've done. I've done dark washes, which is basically just taking a very thin down paint and running it over the surface of your blaster and then wiping away the excess. And what this does, do I have an example of this? Yeah. So what this does is it gets paint into all the crevices and lines and details in there, and this gives you like a shadowing effect. And this is a very basic example of it. But by taking like a very thin black or brown wash, rubbing it, painting it all over, and then wiping away the excess very carefully, you can get like a shadowing effect. Now the opposite of that is if you want to do like wear and tear on your blasters, make them look a little more realistic. I've used this a lot. This is metallic wax. Okay. It's also called rub and buff sometimes. We'll get this. There we go. Try to get the glare down here. Mm-hmm. Again, it's like Craft Smart. I got this at can do this at Michael's. You can also order it online. It's usually called metallic wax, or the brand name is Rub and Buff. And really what it is it's just a wax paste with metallic paint infused in it. I'm going to try to do a demo of this. So you take a rag and you get some of it on your rag. And then the key here is you want to remove most of it. So I usually just take a piece of cardboard and kind of rub off the excess. And then you can take your blaster and you can run it along the edges. Let's see how this works. Pull off any excess. And what that does is it gives you, let's see if I can show it here, a sort of, a worn effect along the edges of your blaster. And it makes it look like the paint is actually rubbed off and the metal of the blaster is exposed underneath. And I've had a lot of success using this if you're a little careful with it. But it's a really cool way to get a weathering effect. And if you're more into steampunk and whatnot, you can get this in like gold and bronze and copper to give more of a steampunk effect. So I highly recommend this. And then finally, you want to seal your blaster so it doesn't get all cracked up and everything. So again, it doesn't have to be anything too fancy. I usually just use Rust-Oleum. I usually go for a semi-gloss because it's right in the middle, but you can do gloss if you want your blaster to be shiny, or matte if you want your blaster to be more dull and weathered looking. And then one more safety point. If you're going to use your blaster,
looks like we have someone popping in early. Let me go ahead and kick them out.
So real quick, if you're going to use your blaster as a 100% cosplay item, you don't have to worry about putting an orange tip on it or leaving a safety tip on it. If you have any intention of using it in public for a game or anything at any point, you really do need to keep that orange tip on there of some kind. Another option, if you want to split the difference, is you can fully paint your blaster, and then if you want to use it at a public game or in a public space or something like that, you can wrap orange tape around the barrel. But always, when you're using it in public, have that orange tip.
All right.
Okay. I think we're getting to the end. Resources, go ahead. These are some online retailers. Unfortunately, a lot of them are shut down during the COVID-19 issue. I thought maybe Out of Darts and Foam Blast were going to stay open, but it looks like they closed up shop this past week. So unfortunately, once things return to normal, these are resources you can use. I highly recommend Out of Darts and Foam Blast as two of the really good ones. I would be wary of eBay because you never know exactly what you're going to get, and especially now shipments from China are going to take forever. Local thrift stores are starting to close up, and meeting people in public spaces from Facebook and Let Go is getting iffy. You can do it, just practice safe techniques.
All right.
Keep going. We can skip. This is talking about some other brands. There's lots of other brands out there. We can skip that. So further research. There's a few channels here I would recommend. And I would look up, the one I would tell for a lot of cosplayers is, if you haven't seen it, look up Adam Savage's one-day build of a Nerf rifle. That video is amazing, and it will tell you everything you need to know about Painting Nerf Blaster from beginning to end. And then finally, my Facebook group, Hampton Roads Nerf Gaming, is another resource where you can contact me if you have any questions.
All right. So time for questions. Let's send it to the lobby. See if go ahead and raise your hand if anybody's got any questions. Looks like our creative director has a question if nobody else does.
And I also had one from
So I cannot elevate you creative director. So we had one question on the stream, I think. No, it was just a comment on our creative director's Nerf gun.
Okay. One thing I will say real quick. This
here we go. So now we have a question.
Blaster.
We got it figured out.
Here, we're having a mute issue. What's the easiest way to keep something from rubbing off, like on my trigger?
So what's the easiest way to keep something from rubbing off, such as on her trigger, where you make contact quite a bit?
For the triggers and whatnot, I would recommend trying a black vinyl dye. Like I said, that'll dye the plastic as opposed to just painting it. But honestly, with something like that, 6, 7, 8 layers of clear coat and occasional refresh. Those are honestly the 2 best techniques.
Okay, thank you.
Probably have time for one more question if there is one. If not, any last thoughts?
Just start modding, start painting. Honestly, maybe start with painting because, again, I mean, this looks like a big complicated thing, but it's you just got to get started with it. This is something that I decided to do a few weeks ago and just went with it. This actually used to be this blaster turned upside down and attached underneath and painted up. And it's not the greatest paint job in the world, but it's my America blaster, and I love it. And just get out there and mod and paint something. And if you have any questions, please contact me through the Facebook group.
My recommendation is always throw a couple Nerf guns in your party bag for any party, whether it's convention or otherwise. They go over extremely well, especially with adults.
Oh, one other one, because my buddy Sean did this. This was actually the first blaster I ever got as a birthday present. He actually painted it for me purple in a Borderlands style. And I wanted to give a shout out to him because this is one of my favorite ones. And this actually got me started into the idea of painting and modding Nerf guns.
Nice. All right.
And I've had this for 3 or 4 years now.
So we're going to go ahead and transition to the con lobby. Thank you very much for your time and all of the effort that you've put in coming to our convention. And I'm sure they appreciate it as much as I do. Up next, we're going to have Mental Health in Steven Universe.